In the last class, we were discussing regarding section 108 about the rights and liabilities of the lessor and the lessee. And on that content, we have discussed that what are the basic rights and liabilities of the lessor and what are the basic rights and liability of the lessee. Upon the liability and rights of the lessor, we have discussed up to a bit in which we have already mentioned that it is the basic right of the lessor to disclose the material defects. Like if there is any kind of the defect in the property, then that defect must need to be disclosed. The lessee must have the idea that what is the basic material defect in the property and how the defect can be resolved. So all these things must need to be informed. This is the first thing we have discussed. The second thing we have discussed, duty to provide the possession of the property, like when there is the transfer of the lease. Where there is the lessor has the basic right and duty to transfer the lease to the lessee. Okay. And third, uh, and secondly, we have discussed about the providing of the possession of the property. It is the basic duty of the lessor to provide the possession of the property to the lessee. And third, guarantee of the peaceful possession, in which we have discussed the lessee can hold the property uninterrupted provided the obligations are met. Where there is a lessee who has accepted the property from the lessor, so it is the basic duty of the lessee to hold the property as uninterrupted. That means the lessee has the right to enjoyment the property without any basic interruption. Okay. Then comes your rights and liability of the lessee, which is explained under that same section only, and it includes a multiple number of rights. The first, like the we have discussed the under the clause D about the accessions of the property. That we have discussed that if there is any natural additions in the property, for example, I have mentioned you in the last class, if there is the presence of the alluvial land, what do we mean by the alluvial land? That we have already discussed that when there is the land that is by the river side and the contradiction in the land used to happen. For example, a specific portion of the land that comes closure when there is the specific movement of the land. Okay, sometimes it happens that in the specific area or the specific location, the water destructs the matlab the area of the land, and sometimes it is about the increasing and decreasing about of the land position. Okay, so this is called the alluvial land. नदी का किनारे जैसे कि हम बात करते हैं जहाँ पे आपका आता है फ्लड आता है या फिर कोई नेचुरल डिजास्टर आता है, वहाँ पे आपका कभी कभी होता है ना कि एक बहुत बड़ा सा जमीन का एरिया वो पानी में डूब जाता है या फिर वो पानी में ही खत्म हो जाता है, राइट? सो दिस इज कॉल्ड द addition or distraction of the lands, that is called the alluvial land. Okay, so when we are talking about the natural additions or any interruptions जहाँ पे either ये add होता है या घटता है, तो this is also accepted in the accession of the property. That means if I am leasing the 10 acres of the land, अगर वहां से कुछ डेसिबल जमीन का ऐसा सिचुएशन है कि जो पानी में मिल जा रहा है, then दिस इज नॉट द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ द लेसर, बिकॉज यहाँ पे लेसर जो है ही इज नॉट द सोल क्रिएटर ऑफ दिस सिचुएशन एंड वो यहाँ पे कुछ कर नहीं सकता. समझ में आ रहा है? Then we have discussed about the destruction of the property, in which we have discussed lease is void if the property is wholly destroyed by the irresistible forces, जहाँ पे situation is out of your control, और any natural calamities, natural disaster जहाँ पे उस situation को रोका नहीं जा सकता था, then in that case the property can be destructed, and in that case this is the another right of the lessee. Then we have discussed about the repairs by the lessee. Then we have discussed it is the duty of the lessor to repair to his own property if the lessee has followed all the terms and conditions. For example, it has been mentioned that the house will not be used for the commercial purpose. Okay, and the house will be only for used for the living purpose. The lessee is already using the house for the living purpose only, but just take an example, due to certain circumstances or due to certain issues, the house started getting like the certain kind of the problems started happening over there. For example, when there is the rain, it the water starts leaking. Okay, there is the any system or the problem in the plumbing system of the house. Okay, so when these kind of the problems are happening, it is the duty of the lessor to repair the property, because it is his own property and the lessee has taken the lease of the property. So it is the duty of the lessor to repair the property. Okay, and when the lessor is unable to repair the property, then in that case the lessee can do that task. यहाँ पे अगर मेरा घर का मरम्मत के लिए मैंने लेशर को बोला, उसी ने बोला कि हाँ कर देगा, बट वो कर नहीं रहा है, एंड आई एम लिविंग एट द सेम हाउस एंड आई एम सफरिंग ऑन रेगुलर बेसिस, मेरे को मतलब छत से पानी निकल रहा है, प्लम्बिंग का काम चल नहीं रहा है, पानी टैप से पानी नहीं आ रहा है. So how far I can adjust in that situation? So what I am doing, I am taking the responsibility and I am repairing the structure of my home, the things of my home. And in that expense, whatever expense amount I have expended or I have done, it is the duty of the lessor to pay that amount to me. यहाँ पे लेसर का क्या ड्यूटी है कि वो मुझे उतना पैसा पेमेंट करेगा जितना मैं खर्चा कर चुकी हूँ. क्लियर, समझ में आ गया? So, this is about the recovery of the expenses when the lessee expenses something for the leased property, and it is the duty of the lessor to recover the monetary expenses if the lessee has expended any kind of the property. But yes, if the lessee has not followed the instruction of the lessor and if there is any kind of the mistake by the lessee, then in that case the lessor is not responsible for that task. Then how does it work? Let's understand that. For example, I have told you that you shouldn't use this house for the commercial purpose. You can just live here and do your work. But you started living here and you started using this for a commercial purpose also. You opened a small company here and you started doing business over here. Okay, so when you started doing your business and started using my home as per the commercial purpose after taking the lease, then what happened? There is certain destruction happened to the house. Okay, for example, the system of the electric system of the house got an injury, or the color of the house has been dismissed. So these things usually happened when you used the house without my permission and when I have permitted to use it for the living purpose, but you started using for the commercial purpose. So after that, the destructions that happened to the house, is the lesser, that means me, I am capable or liable to pay for that? The answer is no, because this has not been happened with my consent. यहाँ पे जो कुछ भी हुआ है, this has been just happened upon a specific circumstances. एक situation के हिसाब से ही वो हुआ है, right? So when the lessee has not followed the words of the lessor, अगर मैंने lesser हूँ, आप lessee है, and I have denied you to do something that don't use the property for the commercial purpose. Instead of listening my words, you still use the property for the commercial purpose. And then the injury happened to house. It is your responsibility as the lessee to recover it. Okay. So this is the about clause 3. It speaks about the repairs of the lessee. Then comes the clause 4, which speaks about the payment by the lessee, which exactly speaks the lessee can pay and recover sums the lessor fails to pay. Okay, so what does it mean? It means when there is any kind of the payment or recovery of the sums, then in that specific circumstances, the lessee can do the payment and can recover such expenses from the lessor. Okay. Then comes your another point, removal of fixtures. So under that I have already made you understand. What do we understand by the fixtures? Fixtures means, for example, when I am buying a house, okay, so there are certain fixtures of the house, certain things are there. जैसे कि there is a temple zone जहाँ पे आप भगवान को पूजा करते हैं, okay, and in that specific place it is the फिक्सिंग, इट इज फिक्स दैट भगवान का मूर्ति वहां पे रहेगा. दूसरा, फॉर एग्जाम्पल योर डाइनिंग हॉल, whenever you are entering your home, there has been a very old model, something that has been decorated at the drawing room. So these things are called the fixtures, जहाँ पे ऐसा बहुत कुछ चीजें होते हैं जिसी को शिफ्ट नहीं किया जा सकता. So those things usually stay there as the fixture. Okay. So when those things is considered as the fixture, for example, you have given me a home as your rent, then in that home, I can see that, for example, any kind of the fixture is that there is the table, there is the chair, there is the books, there is a any hall, or there is the paintings in the house. So as a lessee, whenever you are taking the possession of the house, you have the right to remove all the fixtures. आपका ये हक है to remove all the fixtures of the house or to decorate it according to your convenience. यहाँ पे अगर वो fixtures बहुत ज्यादा ही important है and it is the commitment to the lesser कि ये जो है ये रहेगा, right? So in that specific circumstances, we need to understand that the fixture can be removed. And by whom? By the lessee, the fixture can be removed. Okay. Then comes payment of the lease. Okay. Yeah. Then comes your payment of the rent. So whenever we're talking about the payment of the debt rent, then we need to understand that the rent must be paid timely at the agreed location. That means when there is the repayment of the rent, the rent must be paid timely at the agreed location. जिस लोकेशन पे जिस टाइम पे रीपेमेंट के लिए बोला गया है, the repayment must have to done at that specific duration and at that specific time period. Okay. Then comes your another thing, minimum property condition that is explained under clause M. And what does it mean? It means lessee is bound to return the property in its original condition bearing normal wear. Okay. So it means the lessee is bound to return the property in the original condition. That means if I have taken the home or the land as the condition it is, I have to send it back. If it is the cultural land, under the section 117 we have discussed, if it is the cultural land, then in that specific circumstances, the cultural land cannot be changed. Okay. But when we are talking about the payment of the rent, we have discussed about the rent must be paid directly at the agreed location. Then क्या हुआ? Then it is been spoken that the property condition need to be maintained. That means whatever the condition of the property which was before while taking the property, it should be same after coming up the property. Got it? So then here comes the use of the property. So when we are talking about the use of the property by the lessee, in that specific circumstances we have discussed, the lessee cannot misuse the property or commit destructive acts. That means the lessee cannot misuse the property. Lessee उस property का misuse नहीं कर सकता है. Okay. Then comes your election of the structure. Okay. So when we are talking about the election of the structure, in which we have to discuss that the permanent structures are required to lessers consent express and a agricultural and it is not included in the agricultural process. Okay. Then at the end point we have understood the return of the possession under clause Q, which exactly spoke about the lessee must return possession at any kind of the termination. That means when there is the any kind of the termination in the lease, in that termination of the lease as the lessee, then the lessee has to return the permission thereof. This is the primary thing. Okay. So when we are talking about, then it is about the return of the possession. That means when I am having the possession of the property, even it for a specific time period, then as the owner you have the right on the property, but I have to transfer it to you, so that uh, it will be like the transfer of something by somebody. Okay, got it? Then here comes section 114, which speaks about the return of possession. So when we are talking about return of the possession under clue, under that we have discussed that the lessee must return the possession as the lease termination. For example, the termination or the duration of the lease, that was up to the 3 years or 2 years. Okay. So when that specific duration is completed, specific duration is ended, after that termination of the lease duration, the property need to be attached to her name. Okay. Then comes your 111. Just 1 second, guys. Let me have some water. So, section 110, it exactly deals about the term of the lease. Okay. So, what is the specific term or specific duration of the lease property that we are going to discuss? Okay. So, when we are talking about section 110, the first thing we are going to discuss about the exclusion of the start date. Okay. So, when there is any kind of the lease, then we need to understand that the commencement of the date of the lease is excluded when calculating the term. For example, I have given you the lease of the property on 19th of the December 2024. Got it? So, when there is the exclusion of the starting date, okay, then it is the lease term. For example, this is the lease term for the duration of 1 year, okay. So, here, if I am talking to you, okay, then the answer will be the commencement date of the lease is excluded when calculating the term. For example, if I told you today is 19 December, and for example, let's take in consideration that the lease term is for the duration of the 1 year. So the duration is today 19th of the December 2024, and after 1 year, what will be the tenure? This will be 19th December 2025. Okay. So when it is 19th December 2025, in that specific circumstances, the commencement date of the lease is excluded while calculating them. वहां पे क्या हुआ? The commencement date of the lease is excluded. That means if the lease is commenced from today onwards, then this 19th November will be not calculated by them. Okay. So when we're talking about the commencement date extends till when? Till the ending period of the lease. Okay. If the lease is terminable early without specifying without specifying who holds the right, the lessee has the option. Okay. So how does it mean? यहाँ पे क्या बोला जाता है that if a lease is terminably early without specifying two holds of the right, the lease has the option. Okay. So what is the option? It is the option to terminate the lease. If the lease is terminated early without specifying who holds right, then the lease is an option. For example, the lease usually completes around 7-8, but the lease, when it will be calculated, it will not include the starting date. For example, if it has been started from 19th of the December, then the 19th of the December only will not be calculated. Okay. Got it. So the third point, it exactly speaks about the option to terminate. Okay. So how does it mean? It means when there is the liability or right on the hand of the lessee to either to say yes or either to terminate. Okay. Then if a lease is terminated early without specifying who holds the rights, the lessee has the option. Okay. And then duration of a yearly lease. How does it matter? It means a lease as a date of the lease is excluded and the lease for a year extends to the anniversary of the start dates and started otherwise. For example, if the lease has been done today, then it will be extended to the next year 2024 19th August तक. ओके, तो ये हो गया आपका क्लॉज 1, 2 and 3 ऑफ कंप्यूटेशन ऑफ द लीज टर्म सेक्शन 110. ओके, so then the next thing comes about your concept of the lease under section 111 about the determination of the lease. And yes, one more thing in the above section, whatever we studied about the lease of the property, and as I have already mentioned you that computation of the lease term, the term and conditions of the lease, that is very important in nature, and a lease yearly extends to the anniversary of the start date unless started otherwise. Okay. Then comes your exclusion of the start date. Then it is clearly said that the commencement data of uh, the commencement data, the lease, is excluded when calculating the term. Okay, this is what we have already discussed. Then comes your section 111, which speaks about the determination of the lease. Before going to the determination of the lease, let me remind you something that we have discussed regarding the notice or time period. And under that, we have discussed if it is a house, then it needs the minimum 15 days notice before the vacancy. But yes, if it is not a house and it is a land, then in that specific circumstances, when the land is free or when the land is out of crops, then only the possession of the land can be transferred. Okay, clear? Then comes section 111, which exactly speaks about the uh, the immovable property can end in the following ways. Then what does it mean? Okay, by the passing of the time. What does it mean? When we're talking about the lease ends when the time period mentions when the lease expires. Okay, for example, when there is a lease is continuing and the lease goes with the flow of time. Okay, and with the pass of the time, what happens? The lease ends, the lease terminates, the lease expires. And with the ending of the termination of the lease timing, the lease also comes to an end. Okay. So this is explained the first clause of the section 111 that by the passing of the time, the lease ends when the time period mentioned in the lease expires. Okay. Then comes the second point when the condition is met. That is explained in the clause B that we have discussed that when there is a lease period depends on the occurrence of a specific event. The lease ends when the event occurs. That when there is the any occurrence of the specific event, in that specific circumstances, the lease period also comes to an end. Okay, that means when we are talking about when the condition is met, if the lease period depends upon the happening of a specific event. For example, there is a deal between you and me that the lease is going to be end upon the happening of a specific event. For example, I have taken a deal with you that I'll pay you back the amount of 30,000 of the rupees. So there is the deal between you and me that at the date when I will pay you the 30,000 rupees, at the specific date the lease will be terminated. So this will happen that when the lease will be terminated, when the specific condition will be met, when there will be the occurrence of the specific event, when the condition is met, okay, when the specific event specifically happens, in that happening of the event, the lease terminates upon the happening of certain specific event, okay. Then comes clause C, which speaks about when the lessor's interest ends. Okay, that means if the lessor's right to own or control the property ends upon the event, the lease also ends that what event happens. Okay, so see, first condition we discussed about the passing of the time, when the time is covered, when the time is completed. For example, there is the you have taken a lease of my property, so there is the deal between you and me that with the pass of the time, the lease is being done for the duration of 2 years or 1 year. Okay, so when it is the condition mentioned that the lease is being done for the specific time period, then after the completion of that specific period, the lease automatically comes to an end. Okay, this is the first thing we discussed. The second thing, when the condition is met. For example, the lease has been done for the specific purpose, for the specific circumstances, for the specific happening of the event. And when the specific event happens, when the situation comes to an end, when the condition is met, in that specific circumstances also, the lease comes to an end. The third point, when the lessor's interest ends. What does it mean? If the lessor's right to own or control the property ends upon an event, the lease also ends when that event happens. What does it mean? It means if it is the lessor's right to own or control the property, it is the right of the lessor to own the property or to control the property, and it is dependable upon the happening of the event, and it is the एंड ऑफ द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द लेसर. लेसर जो यहाँ पे है उसका इंटरेस्ट अगर खत्म हो जाता है अपन द लीज, वो लीज को कंटिन्यू करना नहीं चाहता है, देन द लीज ऑल्सो एंड व्हेन दैट इवेंट हैपेंस. वो इवेंट जब होता है तभी ये लीज भी खत्म हो जाता है. ओके, देन वी हैव डिस्कस्ड द क्लॉज डी, which is speaks about when the lessee and the lessor's interest emerges. That means if the who is the lessee, he buys the property, then he himself becomes the owner of the property. वो खुद property का owner बन जाता है. So when there is the owing of the property by the lessor, अगर यहाँ पे जो लेसर है वो प्रॉपर्टी ओन कर रहा है, बट द लेसी बाइज द प्रॉपर्टी फ्रॉम द लेसर. ओके, in that specific circumstances also, the lease comes to an end. Okay, when the lease lessor and the lessee's interest merges, if the ownership rights of the both the lessor and lessee in the property combine under one person, that means the lessor and the lessee becomes one. The lessee buys the property from the lessor. In that specific circumstances, the lease also comes to an end. Okay, then comes by express surrender. When there is the express surrender by the or the voluntary giving up of the rights by the lessee. For example, uh, I have taken the lease of a specific land or the home, and before the completion of the time period, मान लो कि there was the time period of around 2 to 3 years to complete the lease, but before the completion of the time period, I realized that I do not want to continue with the lease. So what I did, I came to you. I informed you that I do not want to continue with the lease and I am giving up my lease. So here, before the time period, if it is the interest of the lessee to terminate the deal, if it is the interest of the lessee to end the deal by his own side, to surrender the deal by his own side, then it is called the express surrender, which is explained under clause E. Got it? Then comes by implied surrender. इम्प्लाइड सरेंडर का क्या होता है? फॉर एग्जाम्पल, द डील इज कंटिन्यूइंग but the lessee is signing or renewing the deal instead of the old one. So in that is called the implied surrender, where the old one automatically comes to an end. For example, you are talking about the house agreements. Okay, the house agreements usually gets renewed on a monthly basis. हर महीने हाउस रेंट का ये जो आपका एग्रीमेंट है वो रिन्यू होता रहता है. ओके, so when we are talking about the renewal of the house agreement upon a daily basis, okay, upon a monthly basis. So for example, इस महीने का 30 तारीख को बिना बोले आई रिन्यूड द एग्रीमेंट. ओके, 31 तारीख को पुराना एग्रीमेंट खत्म होने वाला था, बट मैंने 31st तक वेट ना करके 30 को ही नया एग्रीमेंट फिर से रिन्यू कर दिया. So isn't it considered as the implied termination? The answer is yes. This is called the implied surrender. जहां पे बिना बोले ही पुराने जो है, पुराना जो कंटिन्यू चल रहा था, जो लीज चल रहा था, उसी को एंड कर देते हैं. एक्सप्रेस क्या होता है? When with the mutual consent of the lessor and the lessee, the lessee or the lease has comes to an end. The lessee says that I do not want to continue with the property, and the lessor says I also do not want that you hold this property. So this is the mutual agreement, mutual consent between the lessor and the lessee, that the lessor does not want the lessee to continue on the property and the lessee does not want to continue the property. So this is called the express surrender, where it happens that the lessee can end the lease by voluntarily giving up their rights to the lessor with the mutual consent. Then comes Section 7, which speaks, clause 7, it speaks about the by forfeiture of the property. Forfeiture क्या है? The lessor can end the lease if the lessee breaks the clear condition of the lease. अगर जो लेसी है वो लीज का किसी भी तरह का कंडीशन ब्रेक करता है, पहला चीज हो गया. इफ द लेसी claims the ownership of the property for themselves or claims a third party owns it. Okay, अगर यहाँ पे लेसी क्या करता है, प्रॉपर्टी का ओनरशिप, खुद का ओनरशिप क्लेम करता है या और किसी का ओनरशिप उसी पे क्लेम करता है. थर्ड पॉइंट, द लेसी बिकम्स इंसॉल्वेंट एंड द लीज अलाउज द लेसर टू री एंटर इफ दिस हैपेंस. अगर लेसी क्या हो जाता है, इंसॉल्वेंट हो जाता है, एंड द लीज ये अलाउ करता है टू द लेसर टू री एंटर इफ दिस हैपेंस. ओके, मतलब यहाँ पे जो लीज है, दिस अलाउज द लेसर टू री एंटर द लेसी अपॉन द agreement after getting the solvency. Okay, so these are the circumstances where the lessor can end the lease. Lessor यहाँ पे जो है वो कौन सा कंडीशन पे आपका लीज को टर्मिनेट कर सकता है? पहला जैसे मैंने बताया, द लीज ब्रेक्स ए क्लियर कंडीशन ऑफ द लीज. पहला चीज ये हो गया आपका. अगर लेसी जो है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल यहाँ पे मैंने बोला है लेसी को कि आप इस घर को कोई भी कमर्शियल पर्पज के लिए यूज नहीं कर सकते, but the lessee is not obeying my words. But what she did, she used to use the land or the home for the any other purposes. वो घर का कमर्शियल पर्पज के लिए यूटिलाइज करने लग गई. सो हियर एज ए लेसर, दिस इज माई राइट, दिस इज माई ड्यूटी टू टर्मिनेट द लीज. यहाँ पे ये मेरा हक है, मैं लीज को टर्मिनेट कर सकती हूँ, बिकॉज द लेसी हैज नॉट फॉलोड हिज ड्यूटी ऑन ए स्पेसिफिक मैनर. वो अपना काम सही ढंग से नहीं किया है. सो हियर दिस हैज माई कैपेसिटी टू टर्मिनेट द लीज एज द लेसर. दूसरा, अगर फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू आर द लेसी ऑफ माइन, आप मेरे से घर लीज पे लिए हो, एंड यू स्टार्ट सेइंग मी दैट यू आर द ओनर ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी. आप मेरे को आके ये बोल रहे हो कि मैं घर का मालिक हूँ, ये घर मेरा है एंड ऑल. So when you claim the ownership of the property in that specific circumstances, I have the capability to terminate your lease. Because first of all, you are not the owner of the property. घर का ओनर मैं हूँ. Lease is the ट्रांसफर ऑफ द पोजेसन जो कि हमने पहले से पढ़ चुके हैं। लीज पे क्या होता है, सिर्फ प्रॉपर्टी का पोजेसन ट्रांसफर होता है, प्रॉपर्टी ट्रांसफर नहीं होता है, ओनरशिप स्टिल कंटिन्यूज विथ वन पर्सन। सो अगर लीज के टर्म पे पोजेसन ही ट्रांसफर होना है, तो अगर पोजेसन का ट्रांसफर करते करते आप अपना ओनरशिप ही खुद क्लेम करने लग जाओगे, तो हाउ इज इट पॉसिबल टू एक्सेप्टेबल? अगर मुझे पता है कि प्रॉपर्टी मेरा है और मेरा प्रॉपर्टी को आपने 3 साल के लिए लीज का पोजेसन पे लेके रखे हो, and in between these 3 years, after the completion of the before the completion or after the completion of the lease, you started claiming the property as yours. आप सबको ये बोल रहे हो कि ये प्रॉपर्टी आपका है, आप इस प्रॉपर्टी का ओनर हो। So here this is the ownership of the property for themselves or claims a third party who owns it. अगर और कोई तीसरा पार्टी को जाके आप बोलोगे कि सी इज द ओनर ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी और ही इज द ओनर ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी, और आप खुद को प्रॉपर्टी का ओनर बता रहे हो बट प्रॉपर्टी का ओरिजिनल ओनर मैं हूं, देन आई हैव द राइट टू टर्मिनेट योर लीज। थर्ड पॉइंट, व्हेन द लेसी बिकम्स इंसॉल्वेंट, अगर जो लेसी है वो इंसॉल्वेंट बन जाता है, तभी लेसर का हक है टू टर्मिनेट द लीज। क्योंकि जब लीज लेते हैं ना, तो हम वहां पे पेमेंट करना पड़ता है। देयर मस्ट बी द स्पेसिफिक अमाउंट ऑफ द पेमेंट दैट मस्ट नीड टू बी डन टाइम टू टाइम। ओके, सो अगर वो पेमेंट सही तरीके से नहीं किया जा रहा है, इफ द पेमेंट इज नॉट बीइंग डन इन ए प्रॉपर मैनर, देन इन दैट स्पेसिफिक circumstances, द इफ द लेसी बिकम्स इंसॉल्वेंट, लेसी यहाँ पे इंसॉल्वेंट बन गई है, उसके पास एक फूटी कौड़ी नहीं है देने को, देन यहाँ पे लेसर चाहे तो ये डील को, ये लीज को यहीं पे टर्मिनेट कर सकता है। ओके, ये हो गया आपका। नेक्स्ट आपका आता है या एंड दिस इज अप टू द डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ द लेसर, अगर वो चाहे तो लीज का जो ड्यूरेशन है ना उसी को एक्सटेंड कर सकता है। अगर वो चाहता है कि नहीं चलो अभी लेसी अभी कुछ दिन के लिए फॉर द स्पेसिफिक टाइम पीरियड द लेसी इज इंसॉल्वेंट, बट हो सकता है कि आगे जाके द लेसी कैन बिकम सॉल्वेंट इन नेचर, उसी का सॉल्वेंसी आ जाएगा, तो हम जो है लेसी को अलाउ करते हैं आफ्टर सम डेज द लेसी कैन टेक अप द प्रॉपर्टी अगेन। सो इन दैट सर्कमस्टांसेस ऑल्सो the lessee has the right to re-enter into the property. Okay, so these are the primary circumstances. Next क्या हो गया आपका? Next clause 8, it speaks about the by giving the notice. Clause H, यहाँ पे क्या बोला जाता है? The lease ends when either the lessor or the lessee gives the proper notice to other as agreed upon the lease terms. लीज का टर्म्स एंड कंडीशन को फॉलो करते हुए अगर एक दूसरे को एक स्पेसिफिक टाइम पीरियड से पहले नोटिस इशू कर रहे हैं, देन इन दैट सिचुएशन आल्सो द लीज कैन कम टू एन एंड। ओके, तो ये जो नोटिस का बात है ना, यू नो लाइक हम लोगों ने पढ़ा है कि जब भी अगर देयर इज द कंडीशन ऑफ द हाउस रेंट पे आपका क्या होता है कि द हाउस रेंट हैज बीन डन मंथली टू मंथली, एक एक महीने में हाउस रेंट का जो होता है ना रिन्यूअल होता रहता है। सो यहाँ पे जो हाउस रेंट का कंसेप्ट है, जहाँ पे हाउस रेंट रिन्यू होता रहता है, तो फिर इन दैट सर्कमस्टेंसेस वी नीड टू सी दैट द नोटिस मस्ट नीड टू बी गिवन बिफोर द 15 डेज टाइम पीरियड। और जहाँ पे आपका एनुअली रिन्यू होता है, जैसे कि आपका कल्टीवेशन का लैंड हो गया, आपका कोई घर हो गया, so this kind of the land has been renewed in an annual basis. So in that specific circumstances when the thing is been renewed yearly or from the annual basis, in that specific cases the notice must be given before the duration of 6 months. 6 महीने का नोटिस वहां पे इशू कर देना चाहिए टू लीव द प्रॉपर्टी। ओके, फॉर एग्जाम्पल देर इज अ बिग लैंड ऑफ माइन जहाँ पे एक बहुत बड़ा सा कंपनी अपना बिजनेस चला रहा है। अगर मैं कंपनी को जाके बोलूं कि तुम 2 दिन पे अपना ये सारा इलाका खाली करके जाओ, क्या ये पॉसिबल है? क्या ये रिलेवेंट है? द आंसर इज नो, इट इज नॉट नाइदर पॉसिबल नॉट रिलेवेंट, बिकॉज यहाँ पे जो है लेसर हो गया, मतलब आप अगर मैं अगर किसी को दिया हूँ एज द लीज ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी, देन दिस इज ऑल्सो माई रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी टू सी कि वो इंसान उसी प्रॉपर्टी को सही ढंग से एंजॉय कर पा रहा है भी नहीं। अगर मुझे इस चीज का पता है कि मैं घर को किस पर्पस के लिए रेंट पे दिया था, एंड मुझे पता है कि अगर मैं उस इंसान को जाके आज बोलूंगी कि तुम 2 दिन के अंदर घर खाली करो, वो नहीं कर पाएगा। देयर इज ए बिग इंडस्ट्री, उसी का इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, उसी का बिजनेस है, उसी का घर है, वो मुझसे लीज लिया है, वो मुझसे पैसा दे रहा है। देर इज ए, फॉर एग्जाम्पल देर इज ए बिग लैंड ऑफ माइन जहाँ पे एक स्कूल चल रहा है, बच्चों का एक स्कूल चल रहा है। सो अगर मैं वहां पे जाके बोलती हूँ कि आप 1 हफ्ते के अंदर ये स्कूल को खाली करो, क्या ये पॉसिबल है? द आंसर इज नो। स्कूल का जो दूसरा ओनर है उसको भी दूसरा घर ढूंढना पड़ेगा, दूसरा अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा, अपने बच्चों को शिफ्ट करवाना पड़ेगा। सो दीज आर द थिंग्स दैट द पर्सन हैज टू डू, राइट? सो अगर आप ऐसे आओगे बोलोगे कि यार टर्मिनेट कर दो, ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता ना। समझ रहे हो? सो दिस इज द थिंग। नोटिस एक अच्छा खासा टाइम रहने से पहले ही देना चाहिए। जहाँ पे आपका मंथली बेसिस पे एग्रीमेंट रिन्यू होता है, कोई दुकान का हो गया, घर का हो गया, इन दो सर्कमस्टांसेस आपका क्या होता है कि 15 डेज का नोटिस जो है वो देना जरूरी है। अगर आपका ऐसा होता है कि एनुअली कोई एग्रीमेंट रिन्यू हो रहा है, देन इन दैट सर्कमस्टांसेस आपको 6 महीने से पहले नोटिस देना बहुत जरूरी होता है। ओके, तो ये हो गया आपका सेक्शन 111। ओके, देन कम्स योर waiver of the notice, waiver of forfeiture of the property। एंड व्हाट इज forfeiture of the property? प्रॉपर्टी का forfeiture पहले क्या है ये हम समझेंगे। ओके, forfeiture मतलब ending of the lease, termination of the lease। Okay, for example, I have taken your land as the lease, and the lessor can end the lease. That is called the forfeiture of the property. The lessor can say that no, I don't want to continue the lease anymore. I want to terminate the lease. So this is called the forfeiture of the property. Forfeiture means denial. मतलब किसी चीज को जब्त करना। अगर ये चीज मेरा अंडर है, मैं इस चीज का जो है बेनिफिट एंजॉय कर रही हूँ, फॉरफीचर मतलब मेरे से वो अधिकार छीन लेना, कि मैं उसी का पोजेशन आगे से मेरे को नहीं मिलेगा। दिस इज कॉल्ड द फॉरफीचर ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी। सो व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द 112, it speaks about the waiver of the forfeiture। forfeiture किस तरीके से डिनायल हो सकता है, हाउ द forfeiture ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी कैन बी डिनाइड। दैट मीन्स अगर मेरे को कोई बोल रहा है कि तुमको ये प्रॉपर्टी का जो है वो पोजेशन वो छोड़ना पड़ेगा, तो व्हाट आर द माई राइट्स इन विच आई कैन वेव द forfeiture ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी। ओके, this is what we are going to discuss in the next class, and we are also discuss waiver of the notice to quit। अगर आपको आता है आपका ओनर की तरफ से और आपको लैंडलॉर्ड की तरफ से, आपका जो लेसर की तरफ से, टू वेव द प्रॉपर्टी और टू लीव द प्रॉपर्टी, देन हाउ यू कैन डिनाई द नोटिस। अगर आपको नोटिस इशू किया जाता है, देन हाउ यू कैन डिनाई द नोटिस। आप किस तरीके से नोटिस को रिवोक कर सकते हो, डिनाई कर सकते हो, वो चीज भी हम डिस्कस करेंगे इन द नेक्स्ट क्लास। सो दिस इज ऑल फॉर टुडे गाइस, वी कैन एंड द क्लास हियर। थैंक यू, बाय बाय।